Chinese tourists made 230 million trips during the annual Labor Day holiday, showing a strong sign of economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. How will that impact the global economy? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. After a year with lots of restrictions on business and travel, China came roaring back. The number of trips made was even bigger than before the pandemic began, and the restaurant industry registered the highest number of orders in more than half a decade. CGTN's Jiaxin has the latest from Beijing.
Looking back at the five-day holiday, experts said that China's consumer market shows an explosive recovery. So in terms of tourism, the number of plane tickets, hotels, and other bookings significantly exceeded sales for the same period in 2019. Figures from Chinese online travel company Ctrip showed holiday flight bookings up by nearly 180%, and hotel bookings also rose by more than 40% compared to 2019, and reservations for tourist spots saw a threefold increase. In terms of catering, the data also shows the number of orders in the first 3 days of the Labor Day holiday were the highest in more than half a decade. As for shopping, nearly 500 million parcels were received in the first 2 days of the holiday, up 26% year-on-year. And UnionPay's online transactions totaled more than 750 billion yuan, up 5.5% from the same period last year. It's also worth mentioning that duty-free shops in Hainan were extremely hot among consumers. Just as its weather, nearly 300 million yuan worth of goods were sold in the first 2 days, up by nearly 190% year-on-year.
Time right now to bring in our panelists. From Hainan in China, Einar Tangen is a political and economic affairs commentator. From Shanghai, Jonathan Kao is the managing director for BCD Travel. Liang is a professor of economics. She joins us from Portland, Oregon. And from Miami, John Quelch is the dean of the University of Miami Herbert Business School. Well, welcome to all of you. Einar Tangen, let me start with you. The Chinese economy is rebounding. Consumption is up, and as we just heard, travel is up over the holidays. So put this in perspective for us. What is your assessment of where China is now compared to the period before the pandemic?
Well, it seems that China has completed a V-shaped recovery, and this, there was a lot of questions about consumer sentiment, and I think this puts it to rest. There was, average consumers only spent 75% of what they did in 2019, but the numbers were up by 18%. So it was quite a big difference. And you'll note that probably the reason they weren't spending as much was because they weren't going abroad, where hotels and obviously tickets would be more expensive. They're mostly confined to within China, and this has been a big boost to the Chinese economy, a rare ray of sunshine in an otherwise world which is still struggling with the pandemic.
So at this stage, overseas travel, international travel is still restricted.
Yes, I mean, it's, obviously with what's going on in India and concerns about the pandemic and these new variants, it's just not able to go overseas. If you do, you're looking at whatever the quarantine period is in the destination, and then when you return to China, as 2 weeks in a hotel quarantine supervised, and then 1 week at home or unsupervised. So it's quite a chunk of time. And the Chinese they're not in a position to do that. The international travel is off by over 87%, and that will continue, some experts say, until 2023. But remember, it's not all bad for the rest of the world. Chinese consumers are snapping up luxury goods, especially here in Hainan, where the total seems to be around 700 million yuan spent. And those goods are being made, some are made in China, but the brands themselves will be garnering more profits. As I said, a rare ray of sunshine, economic sunshine, in a very disquieted world.
Jonathan, let's look at the Labor Day holiday. This is what has prompted much of this travel. That holiday lasts from May the 1st to May the 5th. As we just heard, a record 230 million trips were taken within the country. And one of the most visited cities in all that travel was the city of Shanghai, which is where you are right now. Well, CGTN's Wei Lintang has this report on what the impact of all this travel has had on the hospitality sector. Let's watch.
Shanghai remains one of China's top travel destinations over the Labor Day holiday. Throngs of people flock to picturesque sites such as the Bund and the shopping haven at Nanjing Road.
I'm from the central province of Henan. In the past 2 days in Shanghai, we've been to the Oriental Pearl Tower and the Bund. It feels good being in a big city. We hail from a small city after all. It's also our first time traveling long distance since the pandemic.
Impact on the hospitality industry is evident. Domestic hotel giant Huazhu Group says it's reporting growth that's almost back to pre-epidemic levels.
As of April 29th, we have seen a 15% growth in the May Day holiday bookings for all of our 6,700 hotels in China compared to that of 2019. It's also 10% higher than the tomb sweeping holiday a month ago. In March of this year, our revenues per available room have recovered to 95% of the same period in 2019. April's recovery was stronger, driven by business travelers.
China's recovery from the COVID-19 epidemic has been a shot in the arm for domestic tourism. Hotels are seeing bookings back to pre-COVID levels or exceeding them in some cases. But some may wonder if this is merely pent-up demand and whether this trajectory can actually last.
Global hotel chain IHG believes there are solid fundamentals backing up the recovery. And it's not just because consumption in 2020 has bottomed out and the only way is up.
If you move on to this next 5 years, you will notice that government has said the next 5 years income increase will be in line with GDP growth. That is a huge, huge news because GDP growth we talk about, it will be over 6% on average, which means from next year on, Chinese purchasing power, consumption power will be very much improved. The key thing is after 2021, 2022, we will see consumption fly.
Hospitality players are optimistic that large-scale conferences and exhibitions in the next few months will continue to drive the industry's recovery. Wei Lintang, CGTN, Shanghai.
So, Jonathan, what is your sense of what this means? And do you see that kind of demand continuing?
Yes, I do see that. I think that, it is very good. The sentiment is very good right now. That is most important. There is a very strong pent-up demand for sure. But we are also seeing that over the last few long weekends or golden weeks, like the one we just had was the Labor Day, and then we had the tomb sweeping, the Qingming Festival, and then the Spring Festival. So we're seeing a steady increase in every single holiday season, and people are going now on longer trips. And as we can see, the economics, it's very strong. We're seeing almost, I think it's 17 billion US dollars worth of travel-related spending over the holidays. So I think the sentiment is definitely great, and we're also seeing the forward bookings for the summer holidays, especially for the children. It's also shaping up to be very strong. And most importantly, I think for the hoteliers, while the rooms are getting full, it is more important for them that the average room rate is also increasing. So they're not actually selling at a lower rate to get the rooms full, but there is strong pricing power for them as well. So yes, I think that without any further hiccups in terms of smaller outbreaks here in China, I think the trend is definitely up. And I think people are taking on more trips with their family members as well, visiting friends and relatives and taking their children on their trips.
John Quelch, what do you make of what is happening in China? We see very big numbers there. To what extent do you think this will impact the rest of the world, particularly the United States? I mean, China and the United States still have a very close trade relationship.
Well, it's a mark of consumer confidence, obviously, in China. The level of pent-up demand is very strong. I think the hospitality and tourism industry in Europe and the Americas will take comfort from seeing the rebound in China. The appetite for individuals to reconnect in person with family and friends is very strong, and that's something that's very strong worldwide. And so, as was said, the pent-up demand is enabling companies in the industry to extract higher prices and thereby make up for some of the losses of 2020. I think another important ingredient here is the testimony that the pent-up demand evident in the last 5 days suggests for the shift in China from being an investment-led to being a consumption-driven economy. And as you know, Anand, the U.S. economy relies 70% on consumption, while the Chinese economy is somewhere a little over 55%. So there is still headroom in China for that shift towards a higher percentage of GDP to come from consumption. And I think that the evidence of consumer confidence and demand in the last 5 days suggests that that shift is still well on track.
Liang, great to see you. If we look at China's economic performance in the first quarter of 2021, I mean, there was growth of 18%. That's very impressive. Even more significant is the fact that this growth took place when most of the rest of the world is still struggling to recover from the coronavirus pandemic. What does this tell us about China's domestic economic resilience?
Good to talk to you again, Anand. So responding to the question, I think you're right that China's domestic consumption demand has been surging, even though I think there's some concern about April's number when it comes to manufacturing sector and also the construction sector. The PMI for both sectors have edged down, even though they're still in the expansion zone. So I share the sentiments of the previous three speakers that it seems that China's consumers are restoring their confidence, they're spending again, and that's good news for China because it will help to compensate for some of the possible slowdown in export growth because the continued recovery of the world demand is likely to benefit the service sectors more than the manufacturing sector, as people now, in the United States, they have already stocked up a lot of electronics, stay-home recreative equipment, and now they wanted to spend their money on restaurants and bars. So it would be very helpful for China's consumption to continue to grow and provide that demand boost. But I also have some sort of concerns about whether or not the full confidence is up, and also if that's just a one-time short-term, what we call the revenge spending, right? Because the per capita spending during this holiday season, as Einar Tangen pointed out, it's only about 80% of the 2019 level. Now, compared to the pre-pandemic level, it is slightly down, but it is still a great improvement. Thinking, last year the retail sale was down by 3.9%. So I do see a lot of the hopes and optimism that China's economy will continue to grow. But we also need to remain sanguine about how much policy support still needs to be in place to compensate for some of the slower expansion in manufacturing, for instance.
Einar Tangen, you are in Hainan right now, which is in China's southeast, and it is hosting China's first Consumer Products Expo, International Consumer Products Expo, I should say. First, let's watch this report from CGTN's Huang Fei.
From smart gym equipment and gaming consoles to fancy jewelry, watches, and fine foods. Over 1,000 brands from 69 countries and regions are on show here, with hopes to tap into the world's biggest market for premium products.
After the first 3 days of product launches and contract signing, the expo will open to the public on its final day on Monday. And with many brands offering duty-free purchases on site, people who've missed out on overseas shopping sprees will want to splurge here.
Experts say allowing Chinese consumers access to leading international brands on their doorsteps is at the heart of the government's dual circulation strategy. China wants to boost domestic demand and shore up supply chains by welcoming more foreign investment.
This is not only an expo that would support the domestic need for the consumption upgrades, but also for the international brands to be able to connect with this vast market.
Over 200,000 visitors are expected to attend the expo. Analysts say the combination of China's epidemic prevention measures and a resilient domestic economy are the reasons behind its popularity. Huangfei, CGTN, Haikou City in Hainan Province.
I know China has adopted something called the dual circulation strategy. How does an expo like this fit into that kind of strategy? Well, what does the strategy itself call for in the first place?
Well, it's a lot about its domestic spending, but it's also about attracting foreign direct investment. And you see that here in Haikou. Haikou is at the north end of Hainan Island. And while people are partying down in Sanya, there's a lot of business going on up here. For instance, there was $10 billion worth of deals, investment deals that were inked just a few days ago. And as you said, there's 200,000 people attending this particular expo. 50,000 tickets alone have been sold for Monday to the general public, and now those are being actually scalped. They're trying to prevent that. People are so anxious to get in and see that. But you see this dual circulation strategy as China does well, as its economy continues to percolate along. It's drawing more investment in. People are hungry for return. There's tremendous amounts of liquidity all around the world, but there is absolutely no return on value. So people are looking at China very carefully. You can see it in the amount of money flows coming in, not only for bonds, but for equities and investments. So that is key to Beijing's strategy. Get more consumer spending, which, as my colleague pointed out, looks very good. Disposable income is set to rise by 6% on average a year. And you contrast that with areas like the US and Europe, where you're not going to see anywhere near that amount of that number. And that is very attractive to the investment side of it, which you're already seeing.
Liang, what are your thoughts on this strategy? I mean, it's very much a part of China's move away from being a sole manufacturing economy into one that is driven by consumer spending, isn't it?
Yes, so the dual circulation does emphasize a lot on domestic consumption, and some people might interpret this as, China is cutting the ties from the rest of the world. And I think that is a very mistaken interpretation. So like what Anna was talking about, that China is also trying to attract foreign investment, and China is also promoting imports, right? So as China's domestic demand grows, and also as China's RMB appreciation continues, if you recall, Chinese RMB is getting stronger since May last year. So I think all of this will help China to connect with the rest of the world by not only providing, high-end and high-value added exports to the rest of the world, but also import and also provide a very business-friendly environment and high return opportunities for foreign businesses.
Jonathan, I want to get back to travel. As we heard from our fellow panelists a moment ago, Chinese international travel plunged by 87% last year. In fact, there's one consultancy which says that it's unlikely to get back to pre-pandemic levels until the first quarter of next year, 2023. Is that a fair prediction? And what kind of impact is this going to have on the international travel industry?
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, the international travel is going to be challenging because of what is happening in the rest of the world, especially in countries like India and Brazil, where there are now variant strands of the COVID-19. I do think that it's a new reality or new normal that we have to live with. So, yeah, on the international business, I do think that we probably won't see anything happening until late 2022 or 23 or even longer. But I do think that the domestic travel has been improving and steadily, and we're seeing for corporate travel, we're seeing already back to 90% of previous levels and rising as well. So I think it's It also provides an opportunity for companies in the general tourism industry to invest further domestically, because people are now not traveling internationally, so but there's still desire for travel. So they will go to find places in China, within China, where they've never been to, or go to the big cities like Shanghai and Beijing and Guangzhou to visit. And there is definitely a lot of investment opportunities here, as China is a very big country. And I think it's with the advance of social media platforms like TikTok or Douyin in China, and people are discovering places where they've never been, and it's and also with the investment in the high-speed rail, the Gaotie, and also the airline network, it is now easier and easier to travel to these places before, where there is very limited transportation. So I do see that there is a very big opportunities in terms of domestic travel here in China. But yes, international will still be quite challenging, I think.
John Quelch, of course, travel and tourism is a major part of the global economy. According to the World Tourism Organization, which is a UN agency, 2020 was the worst year for international tourism. The number of international travelers dropped by 1 billion, and the loss was $1.3 trillion. Now, we know that the Chinese form a big part of the world's travelers, as a traveling group. They spent more than $250 billion in 2019 before the pandemic. So what kind of knock-on effect is this going to have?
It's very unfortunate that international travel is currently curtailed. Obviously, the European Union has, in the last week or so, developed its passport policy across all of the nations of the EU, and they're hoping very much to be able to implement that by July of this year. The question will be whether or not Chinese tourists will be able to travel internationally and/or will have the appetite to take what they may perceive to be a more risky international trip as opposed to staying domestic. Normally, during the May Day holiday, the Labor Day week holiday, the hotels in Phuket, in Thailand, and elsewhere in Southeast Asia do extraordinarily well from Chinese tourists. So those hotels have not been able to enjoy a rebound this year as a result of Chinese travelers staying domestic. I'm very hopeful that we see progress on the international travel front before 2022. And one of the reasons is that a significant portion of our graduate students at the University of Miami Herbert Business School are Chinese, around about 25% per year. Fortunately, the U.S. Embassy and consulates have now opened for visa processing of student applicants, and they're focusing on those student applications over the next 3 months. So we're very hopeful that we will welcome a full class, a full complement of Chinese students in August of this year. But there still may be difficulties in them traveling from China to the U.S. Directly. They may have to go through Singapore or Bangkok or the Middle East to get here.
Liang, very briefly, I mean, this is a bleak picture as far as international travel is concerned, but it is to China's advantage because there's more domestic travel, isn't there? It's better for the Chinese domestic travel industry.
Well, I think to some degree, yes, because there's this complementary effect, there's a substitution effect. But at the same time, I think, Chinese tourists still enjoy going abroad and experience different cultures, etc. Right. So I think from that point of view, it's not a zero-sum game. And going back to the question about international travel, I think in addition to controlling the pandemic and rolling out the vaccines, I think it also takes policy coordinations, like what vaccines are being recognized by what country, and also that political economic tensions need to be eased so that students would have the confidence to study abroad and enjoy other opportunities.
Einar Tangen, we have a few minutes left. I want to go to the bigger picture on the economic and trade relationship between the United States and China. President Biden, who's now been in office for a few months, he's retained much of the measures that were implemented by former President Donald Trump. I mean, we see the tariffs, they're still in place right now. And it looks like the US strategy right now is to form some kind of united coalition with their allies, especially in Europe, against China. How concerned is China over this?
Well, I think China is concerned. I mean, any time that you have your trade partners ganging up against you with the explicit goal of kind of, walking you backwards, that has to be very disquieting. I mean, for China, it seems that their success is the issue here. If China was not successful, none of this would be going on. And that is the unfortunate part of it. This has become a kind of geopolitical king of the hill game where the U.S. is trying to maintain its political, economic, and military advantages. But that means that it sees anybody who's rising as a threat rather than a partner. I think it's very important that countries realize and I think most countries do, that each sovereign nation has its own path to prosperity, and they have to find it. There's been really no luck in imposing any kind of ideological constraints, despite everybody saying that democracy has made everything better. It hasn't necessarily always worked in every single country. Yeah. We can think of Arab Spring. We can go down the line. Currently, within the world, you have a lot of strong men who have not been able to offer the kind of solutions that are necessary for the people. So as long as this continues, it's going to be very, very difficult for China, and they're going to have to be on their guard and think more creatively. China cannot take on the rest of the world. It needs to find other countries who believe, as they do, that There should be an ability to follow your own destiny.
John, I've only got a minute left, but what are your views on this? The United States has said many times, repeatedly, that it welcomes competition, but we're hearing more and more of a confrontational tone, aren't we?
We are, and I think it's partly a function of the fact that the Biden administration has very thin margins in the U.S. Senate to work with, and the China issue is an issue which in the short term they can develop common ground between Democrats and Republicans that will perhaps facilitate the passage of the very important domestic agenda measures that the Biden administration is really prioritizing. I suspect that once those are consummated, once those are legislated, we may then see a little bit more of a public accommodation to a more cooperative as opposed to combative tone.
Thank you. Well, thanks to all of you for being with us. Thanks for being on the show. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.